Well, let's continue the conversation now with our Ottawa Bureau Chiefs. Robert Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Mia Rabson, Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Canadian Press, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to the three of you.
Hello, Michael.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, listen, we need to talk about this hot mic moment. So here you get this candid comment from the Prime Minister, which he wasn't expecting to be shared so widely. But how does it change the conversations between our political leaders, Bob, and the conversations they're having with industry and community groups?
Well, look, it's gone more beyond the hot mic of him saying that he wants to annex Canada for our critical minerals, but he also talked after the hot mic moment was over by saying that the president brought up a 1908 treaty, Canada-U.S. treaty on setting out the borders, and he said, I can just revoke that treaty and annex Canada. And the Prime Minister said, wait a minute here. You can't do that. They're international treaties. You just can't do this. But that shows you the state of Donald Trump's mind. And the other issue with this is who's telling him this? Because Canadian officials went back to the Americans who they thought had helped organize this meeting, and they said, what is going on with this 1908 treaty and this critical mineral stuff? Well, we don't know. So they think it's Steve Bannon or Stephen Miller or somebody else from the far right that are feeding him this sort of stuff. But, even when you raise these kind of things, you increase, and they become public, you increase the possibility that that will annoy Trump in the White House, and what next is he going to do against you? We really just want to kind of calm everything down and let him move on to some other shiny object.
Yeah, although it's hard to ignore this hot mic moment, because this is obviously it takes here's the summit happening in Toronto. This idea that I think people were in this part of the world were trying to comfort themselves by saying, oh, it's a joke, you can ignore it. But when the Prime Minister says that Donald Trump takes the idea of annexing Canada very seriously, how does it change the conversation, Mia?
I mean, the conspiracy theory side of me might suggest that this wasn't really a hot mic moment. I mean, even if he wouldn't expect it to be heard specifically, he didn't go into a room with like more than 100 people thinking this wasn't at some point going to get out. Someone in that room was going to share this information with someone at some point. So he didn't say this thinking it was just going to be a quiet, private moment. I think he actually wanted this sentiment to get out. They were maybe caught a little bit flat early on when they tried to suggest it was just a joke. Maybe they did think it was just a joke and have themselves realized that it's a little bit more serious. But it has changed the conversation. And to me, the fact that they're actually acknowledging that, and of course, Trump saying he doesn't need anything from Canada, but he would like us to become the 51st state. Well, those two things don't make any sense, because if we don't have anything he needs, why would he want us to become a state? What does he want from us? The resources we have that the United States does not. Oil, obviously one of them, but critical minerals is a big thing. There are many of them the United States doesn't have any of, and Canada is one of its biggest suppliers of those. So to actually put this into words, it's I think what people have been thinking and wondering, like, why is he even talking about this? We are finally having the real conversation about what he's talking about, and why this is more than just a joke.
Yeah, well, I think it's been interesting to listen to political leaders trying to calm the waters down here in Canada over this 51st state comment, but listening to academics who talk about political languaging and this idea that it's a clear signal that he does not respect Canada as a sovereign country. Joël-Denis, how does it change the conversation between leaders and business groups and communities?
Well, among Canadians, I think it does change the conversation massively, and we've seen an emergence of nationalism in Canada that I've never seen before in my lifetime. I know what national looks like in covering Quebec politics. Now I see it coming up and being very much fueled by what Mr. Trump is saying and thinking about Canada. So whether this voluntary or not, that this mic incident, I think it will serve to mobilize Canadians and stay alert about what Mr. Trump wants to do with Canada, and also lead us to think seriously about making sure that we keep our economic sovereignty. And that brings along a lot of reflection, thinking about how can we make sure that we maintain the border line that was, as Bob mentioned, signed in a treaty 100 years ago, is respected by Mr. Trump and his fellow people. But don't forget something. Mr. Trump is having a very hard stance on Canada. And he's got followers in the United States who will maybe pick up his message again. So it's a dangerous slope for the United States and for us as well. So we need to keep mobilizing, I think, the Canadian population, and that's one way to do it for Mr. Trudeau to do it. And it brings the conversation also to the another level, political level. Who's best equipped to face that threat? And that's becoming a political conversation that we're having right now.
Okay, well, let's talk about that because, obviously what's happening with Donald Trump and vis-a-vis Canada does not exist in a vacuum. We have happening right now a Liberal leadership race. We are facing a federal election sometime this year. October, of course, is when it's meant to be. Probably going to be a lot sooner than that. How does Donald Trump and what has transpired really in about 2.5 weeks of his presidency, how has that affected the ballot question for Liberal leadership and for any eventual federal vote?
Look, we all thought the ballot question was going to be the carbon tax and cost of living. Well, yes, cost of living is still the ballot question, but it's 25% tariffs from Donald Trump, which has scared the country. And so we went out and we, with Nick Nanos, our pollster, and we asked Canadians who was best qualified to deal with Donald Trump. Almost 40% people say Mark Carney, and only 26% said Pierre Poilievre, and only 12.5% said Freeland. All of a sudden, Mr. Carney has become the man to watch, because Canadians look at him and say, this guy ran the Bank of Canada during the financial crisis, got us out of that in 2008, and he was there warning against pulling the UK out of the European Union. So he tried to manage the Brexit crisis, and we're scared. And he looks like the guy that might be they're saying he's the guy that's best qualified to do that. And you got to say that Mr. Poilievre and his people must be very, very concerned, because they're still calling him carbon tax Carney, and he's already said, like, I'm out of this. I don't believe in the carbon tax right now. I'd rescind it. And he's also moved to the center. He says no capital gains tax. I'm for pipelines. I'm for electricity grids. I'm for cutting taxes. I mean, this is not the Pierre Elliott Trudeau party. That's the party of Jean Chrétien.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we certainly have been hearing comments around Carney even before the polling, quite the numbers. But how does it change the ballot question from what you're seeing, Mia?
Well, the ballot box question was already potentially changing just from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stepping aside, because this was also going to be a referendum on his leadership and his prime ministership. He took himself out of the running for that, or his party forced him to anyway. And then you have the leadership candidates who all, within first 10 days or so of the leadership campaign, essentially took the carbon tax off of the table. For the Conservatives, it's difficult because they've been spending their entire preparation for 2 years preparing to campaign against two things, Justin Trudeau and the carbon tax. So you see them sort of struggling a little bit right now to pivot. You're seeing them trying to also gain a foothold, because in a matter of a sort of a national crisis, if we want to call it that, against an international partner or someone like Donald Trump, it is actually the government and the governing party that people are looking to. And so Pierre Poilievre, sort of off to the side, is struggling to sort of find his way into that conversation. And all Canadians want to know right now is how we are going to deal with Donald Trump and how we're going to prevent these kinds of tariffs, or at least get them off the table if they do ever actually materialize. And the Conservatives haven't found a way into that conversation as much as they'd like to right now.
Joël-Denis?
Well, Mr. Poilievre has not adjusted his discourse, public discourse, on the new evolving situation brought about by Mr. Trump and his attack on Canada. So he needs to adjust that. Just saying that carbon tax Carney is like Justin Trudeau will not cut it. So we're still waiting for him to adjust. Meanwhile, Mr. Carney is adjusting, resetting the Liberal Party, as Bob mentioned, bringing it to the center right, talking about military spending, yes, but also balanced budget. All those bread and butter issues that is, usually a strong element for the Conservative Party. So he's moving back to where traditionally the Liberal Party has been successful, to the center. And as Bob said, Jean Chrétien would be very happy, because the Liberal Party will be flying with both wings with Mr. Carney.
Okay, well, we'll be watching that. That was good. That was good. It threw me off. Okay, but before we're done, because of this tariff threat from Donald Trump, we're talking about greater diversification for the Canadian economy, and all of a sudden we're revisiting, it seems, the discussion around two pipelines that were put to bed, Northern Gateway and Energy East. I'll ask you, Joël-Denis, because Energy East essentially did not move forward because of opposition in Quebec. Where does that stand right now? Is this conversation? Is it a potential unity divider, or is this something that Quebecers can rally behind right now?
I think my sense is that Quebecers can rally around that. We've seen the comments made by the Premier of Quebec, François Legault, evolving very much in a few days because of the threat from Donald Trump. And if Mr. Trump goes ahead with the tariffs, there will be a massive movement, I think, to try to, as I mentioned earlier, secure our economic sovereignty. And that is a bread and butter issues, and people will understand that we need to do our own things, make sure that we secure our energy, and we can find other markets, and that's going to be a critical element of the debate.
But companies are not going to come in
No.
and build these pipelines unless the governments provide financing for this, because they've been screwed the last time and they won't do it again. These things cost billions of dollars and they take many years, and you get halfway through and the government changes and they pull the plug on it. That's not going to happen. So we are going to have to put up the money to have these pipelines built. We should have had them built 10 years ago. We need them built now.
Yep.
Okay, well, we continue to follow the discussion. Bob, Mia, JD, thank you for that. I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.